We're so grateful that you are here with us today for what is going to be an outstanding conversation from our senator with Rick Larson. We are grateful for our relationship with the Sutherland Institute that is helping to bring this here to us today. This is a great conversation. We're looking forward to this, Senator. We're so glad you are here with us today, and for the students, one of these rare and great opportunities for you to be with us today. After we hear from the senator today, we will have a panel discussion here in this room. So we encourage you to stay, listen. We'll talk about some of the things we went through today with the senator. It's going to be time well spent on very critical issues that we care about. So thank you for being with us, and we'll turn the time over to you, Rick.
Thank you, Senator. That's great.
Climb on top of our perches.
All right. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
I can't believe it's been a year since we did this last.
That's true.
Time goes by, a lot has happened. So the audience knows the focus of our conversation today is going to be mostly about America's economic challenges and opportunities. There appear to be plenty of both. So should we dive right in?
You bet.
Okay, good. There's one issue I want to address because I'm asked about this all the time. So the supply chain in our nation, there's no apparent reason it should have changed significantly. It's always been raw materials or product, goes through refinement or manufacturing, and then it's delivered for retail sales. Some complexities along the way, but it feels different since COVID. It's never fully re-engaged. Can you explain to people why?
Yeah, and I'm going to put it in a broader context, which is that as the world has adopted free enterprise, and following the collapse of the Soviet Union, there was a recognition, free enterprise works. China adopted it to a degree. Other nations have. Russia has adopted free enterprise of one sort or another. We anticipated that everybody would play by the same rules, so that companies would get various raw materials from various places. We'd supply things from different countries. And we all went to the places where we could get the best quality for the lowest price for the products we had. But China decided to play a different game, which is they decided to play by entirely different rules, which began by saying, we're going to dominate the raw materials that are needed to make those things which are going to be the industries of the future. So we're going to dominate the raw ingredients for batteries, for solar panels, and the like, and semiconductors and so forth. And so they went around the world with the so-called Belt and Road investment, about $1 trillion. They invested in infrastructure, not in China, but outside of China. And if you look at where they were investing, we sort of said initially, oh, they're helping the African nations and the Latin American nations. Oh, no. They were buying mines around the world, and then they were getting railroads to take the product of those mines to a port. Then they were buying the port to make sure they had the control of the raw material to the port and then to China. Oh, I forgot processing. Many times the raw materials require processing, and they bought processors as well. So if you look at the key raw materials that are needed for batteries and solar panels, for instance, in the world today, they're basically 70 to 80% owned at the mine by China, or 70 or 80% owned at the processing center by China. They dominate. So as the world goes electric, as we have more and more electric cars and other elements of our society that are driven by electricity, China becomes the new OPEC. And we've gotten used to OPEC, a bunch of nations that came together and they collude on pricing. But the old OPEC had a lot of members in it. Now, Saudi Arabia may have been the biggest and strongest, but there were a lot of members in OPEC. The new OPEC, the electric OPEC, has only one nation, China. And so as we electrify our fleet of automobiles, recognize we are completely beholden to and subject to China. So part of what's happened is we've allowed ourselves to find that we're in a position of extreme weakness and vulnerability to a nation that's may have some hostile intent. So that's one part of the supply chain challenge that we have. China has been playing industrial policy as the nation, buying key resources and locking up and creating monopolies. That's illegal here. Our country doesn't do it, and we don't create monopolies, we break them up. And we've let this go on and on and on. And so that's a real challenge. Another challenge that we had is semiconductors. We used to make the best semiconductors in the world here in the United States. And American companies like Intel that were making semiconductors said, oh, some of these other semiconductors, the real hard ones to make, we're not making a lot of money on them. We'll let them get made in Taiwan. And so TSMC, the largest semiconductor company in the world, is in Taiwan. They produce about 70% of the semiconductors in the world. Virtually everything you buy, cars, cell phones, iPads, TVs, and so forth, require semiconductors. I'm told a Ford pickup has 50 different semiconductors in it. 70% of them come from Taiwan, all right? And so we're now extremely vulnerable there. What happened following COVID, the COVID pandemic, was that the demand for semiconductors dropped during COVID, and so they pulled back their production at TSMC. Then when the demand came roaring back, they were unable to keep up, and we've had a hard time getting the raw materials that we need. So we're getting back. I would note that Taiwan is about 100 miles from China. As part of our national policy, we consider it one China, Taiwan plus the People's Republic of China. China may try and grab Taiwan, or at least take it over, perhaps in a nonviolent manner. But think about what it would mean if all the semiconductors we need for our rockets, our airplanes, our automobiles, our trucks, and so forth all come from an entity controlled by China. So yeah, supply chain is a big issue, and that's why this year a number of senators and myself drafted a piece of legislation calling the Department of Defense to rethink all of our supply chain and to make sure that we are able to supply all the raw materials we need to defend ourselves from free countries. Doesn't have to be just from the United States, but from free countries. And by the way, sorry to go off like this. No. One last thing. One thing that really irritates me, when you hear, when the president, and it's basically the presidents on the opposition party, President Obama and now President Biden, when they name huge swaths of land in America as national monuments, the enviros are all very excited. That's fantastic, you're preserving this land. Well, that's the land where we have uranium and where we have the raw materials that go into making batteries. So we're basically, by doing that, guaranteeing that America can't be competitive in the new economy. So these are some of the reasons why a few of us are a little upset by the land grab taken by the federal government.
So you mentioned the National Defense Act. Let's drill down on that, because within your answer, your answer went from economic concerns to national security concerns seamlessly. Tell us a little bit more about that Defense Act and what you advocated for within it.
Well, Senator Menendez, who's the Democrat chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, he and I drafted a bill saying, you're going to find this hard to believe, saying that we ought to have a strategy for dealing with China. Hard to believe because you'd think we already had one, but we don't. China has a game plan by 2049 to dominate the world, economically, militarily, geopolitically. And by the way, they're on a pathway to get there. They've got some real challenges right now, but they're on a pathway to get there. It was pointed out in Graham Allison's book that when China is able to have the same output per worker we have more output per person because we're automated. And in agriculture, we use tractors and technology. They're developing those technologies and becoming more automated. But when they have the same output per person we have, their economy will be 4 times larger than ours. And if their economy is 4 times larger than ours, their military will be at least 4 times larger than ours. So we recognize there's some real challenges as we look at a growing, thriving China. And we will be able to continue to lead the world if we're smart and have a strategy. So part of the legislation we put in place is to call on America to finally develop a strategy. And that doesn't have to be made public, but it does have to be something which Republican and Democrat administrations buy into and continue to execute. Part of that is economic, which is you can't allow China to play by rules that the rest of us can't play by, to monopolize key raw materials, for instance, and then have access to our markets. You can't allow that to happen, or else they will have such resources that we can't keep up.
You raised a lot of interesting questions, and news about China always causes an interesting dual response in the media and among people we talk to in the state of Utah. What do you consider some of the more notable challenges? Well, first of all, do you believe we have a coherent foreign policy when it comes to China? And what have we done to harm that? And that could be anything from balloons flying overhead to the theft of intellectual property. How are we managing what the policy that does exist?
Well, we've been sort of ad hoc. We respond to things China does and say, hey, you can't do that anymore, and we're going to shoot down your balloon. And not that I disagree with the steps we've taken, they're just not comprehensive and coherent. A strategy, when you hear the word strategy, I mean, I made my living before politics in developing strategies for companies. Companies first I consulted to, and then companies I bought. And a strategy was, what are your objectives? What are the principles that you're going to apply? What are all the tactics that are going to allow you to get there? So for instance, we had to have for each country in the world a plan for how we're going to make sure that we're strong there, we're getting our voice heard there, and that any attacks that are coming from China or investments coming from China, we're able to counter and make sure that we preserve our interest there. We had to have that for each country. We had to decide exactly what it is we want to communicate to the world. We need to understand which products we're going to allow them to sell into our country. We're going to have to decide which semiconductor chips we're going to allow them to buy. By the way, the only way we can control AI from getting in the hands of very bad people is limiting the massive chips that are required to run AI. So these are the kinds of things, just some of the tactics we're going to have if we're ultimately going to be smart in dealing with China. And so I don't criticize either the former Republican administration or the current Democrat administration for the tactical steps they've taken along the way, but say we need to have some way of putting it all together and knowing what we're going to do. And with regards to the old Soviet Union, our strategy there was containment. All right, we were going to do everything in our power to contain them from going to other parts of the world, whether it's Africa or Latin America. We're going to every corner. We're going to make sure and contain them in one place because we felt that economically they couldn't keep up if we contained them to where they were, and that ended up being right. By the way, one of the great accomplishments, there are very few, of my and your generation, is that we allowed two great powers to exist and not go to war. In the history of the earth, there have been 15 instances where a new nation has become a superpower to confront an old superpower. In those 15 cases, in 12, it resulted in war. Only 3 escaped war. One of those 3 was the US versus the Soviet Union, where we did not go to war. And that, great tribute to those. I'm hopeful that we're likewise going to be able to thread the same needle with regards to China. I can't imagine going to war with the kinds of weapons we have, not just atomic, but hazardous pathogens, cyber warfare, other kinds of warfare that exist today. We can't possibly imagine going to war, but it's going to take a real effort, and we're going to have to get a lot smarter in the way we respond and confront China to help both of us divert our courses sufficiently that we can compete and succeed for our people, but not cause conflict.
I'm somewhat compelled to ask the next question, and a little bit of a preface for the audience and those who may not be familiar with Sutherland Institute. We're a public policy think tank. We're not a political organization. And so I ask this question from a public policy standpoint. Do you feel that this current administration, is the relationship with China unduly compromised because of the current administration?
Well, I don't know that I would blame any one administration over another, but I can tell you that we don't have much of a relationship with China at this stage, at the senior level. There's an attempt on the part of the President and the Secretary of State to establish some links. The Secretary of the Treasury was over there. The Secretary Austin of the Department of Defense has not been able to have a dialogue yet with his counterpart in the PRC. So we're behind there. Some of that is just anger at what we're doing with regards to limiting the semiconductors we'll send to China. And I understand why they don't like that. Some of it is anger at the tariffs that President Trump put in place, and President Biden didn't get rid of them. They're there and will probably get even more onerous as time goes on, in part because we're not going to allow someone to monopolize a product which has normally been in global commerce, and then charge a monopoly price on it to us, and then undercut the competitiveness of American industries. So China's not going to like it, but I think we have to show backbone and strength. At the same time, I do hope that we're able to see a great deal more dialogue. I would not go so far as to have a president say, "I love you, Xi Jinping." I wouldn't go that far, but I would think efforts to have more communication and to find places of common interest. We have a lot of places of common interest. One of them is on the climate change. And I know my side of the aisle doesn't want to talk about climate change. Why, I don't know. But climate change is a global issue. China is by far the largest emitter of CO2 in the world and will continue to grow in their emissions of CO2. Our emissions of CO2 are going down. We ought to be able to find some collaboration. By the way, they make the point, yeah, but on a per capita basis, you guys are putting out a lot more CO2 than we are. They're right on that. All right, so we can each point at each other, but there's a common interest that I think we can find.
Slight current headline diversion, because I'm always interested in comments about depoliticizing certain issues. So we're watching an unspeakable disaster in Hawaii. We're watching the political attacks begin to emerge, and we're starting to see accusations that we'll see if they play out or not. Are we making a mistake? And you can say this to a room full of young minds who have the future in their hands. Do we make a mistake in politicizing everything?
Oh, absolutely. It's really sad. Look, what's happened in Washington, and there are some that Ian Bremmer, for instance, who's an observer of foreign policy and provides advice to corporations around the world, looks at America and says the problem with America is that you become politically dysfunctional. You can't work anymore. It's not working, and in part that's because some people go to Washington to make noise, and some go to make law. And those that just go to make noise are getting to be a larger group. And they want to appeal to the base of their respective party and to get them excited, to have them all, yelling and angry. It's on both sides of the aisle. And so if you're elected as a senator or a congressperson, you go back and you just want to make noise, there's a big crowd that loves to hear the noise. If you ask them, by the way, what did you pass? What legislation did you write or negotiate that became law? They got nothing to say. Because to become law in the United States, for something to become law, requires both parties to support it. I mean, I hope you understand that. For something to pass the United States Senate requires 60 votes. Neither party has 60. So you have to get Democrats and Republicans to agree. Oh, and by the way, we have a Republican House and a Democrat president and a Democrat Senate. So for something to become law requires reaching common ground. But the base of each party isn't interested in compromise or reaching common ground. If you go out and tell people, I'm going to fight for common ground in this important issue, well, they'll boo you. They want you to say, I'm going to attack. These guys are bad. It's the interest in American politics today is to be angry and attacking, making noise. And at a time when we face extraordinary challenges, AI, climate change, China, and our debt, not to mention our social capital as a society. As we face these extraordinary challenges, to have our political system locked in making noise is a little frustrating.
It's interesting. It's actually locked up by design, which I think some people in their frustration fail to realize because of that need for compromise.
Yeah.
Let's talk about AI. So there are at least two dimensions to AI that can make some people nervous, along with all the wonderful potential. And in fact, more functionality right now than I think a lot of people realize. It's already having a tremendous effect. But people worry, A, am I going to lose my job? And what are the ethical considerations around AI? It's a technology that has the potential, even though it can do certain things. Should we allow it to do certain things?
We have no choice.
Give us a flyby. How are you looking at it?
Well, I mean, Meta's most recent version of AI, Llama, is available on open source. So we can regulate all we want to, but it's available to anybody in the world. And not just American, any entity in the world that wants to get AI can get it by getting Llama on open source. So it's out there. There will be new versions that will be far more powerful than the current version, but they're coming, I mean, like every 6 months. I mean, I'm one of those that's, I mean, I'm terrified of it. I got to be honest with you. People say, well, you need to regulate it. It's like what? A bunch of 70-year-olds in the Senate are going to regulate it? You know, I can barely operate my cell phone. I mean, how am I going to regulate AI? And I can regulate it. Maybe I can regulate companies here, but it's global. This is a technology, so it's going to be around the world. Probably and we do spend, by the way, in the Senate, and I know in the House as well, a lot of time working with the leaders of some of the AI companies to say, how can we prevent the worst from happening? And they say, well, you can engage efforts at AI to prevent the worst from happening. That's one thing you can do. Number two, you can try and manage where these massive chips are that are required to run AI and try and keep them from getting in the hands of the world's worst people. I mean, you know, right now there are probably 100 scientists in the world that can create a smallpox pathogen, but they're all associated with government labs. But if AI just goes and runs amok and is anywhere, well, you're going to have 1 million people that can make a smallpox pathogen, and some of them won't be good people. I mean, these are. I mean, so I'm very concerned about AI. I don't see how we're able to regulate AI to keep it from happening. I think it happens, and it'll happen around the world. And the best thing we can do, in my opinion, there are a few things we can do. One is to manage very carefully the semiconductor chips. Number two is when a company is about to come out with a new major leap forward in an AI product, to test it first, and to have people, not just in government, but in industry, test it before we launch it into the world to make sure that it doesn't, for instance, allow people to take over all of our bank accounts or to shut down all of our infrastructure or to do other things that would be devastating to our society.
So in your private career, you've dealt with a lot of real-life people and real-life companies very successfully. You understand the value of human capital, of mind share, of intellectual property. How does a young person prepare themselves in an emerging AI economy, and knowing that it's a bus that possibly can't be driven, certainly from a regulatory standpoint? Where is the value of human beings?
I wish I had the right answer for all you guys on that. The truth is, there are some jobs that AI will never have any impact on, all right? If you're a nurse or you're a surgeon, you know, AI is not going to replace you. You're working in government, you'll never get rid of government employees. So they're always, all right. So
going to government.
Yes. So I mean, there are a lot of places throughout our economy where you're a contractor. I mean, you know, you're building homes, you're building apartments. AI is not going to lay bricks, all right, or be a plumber or electrician. And these are high value enterprises and careers. So there are plenty of places where AI won't affect you. There are other places where AI will have a big impact, and the key is to learn how to use it to make yourself more productive. AI is a tool, just like a computer is a tool, and the internet is a tool. It gives us more information, helps us make better decisions. And if you're going into a profession, let's say in finance or the law or radiology, you know, as a physician, then you want to become conversant with how AI can help you and make you more effective. And those people that are good at AI will do very, very well indeed. But you know, don't be one of those that says, I'm going to take a lot of phys ed and then hope I get a job in finance. That's not going to work. You're going to need to be conversant not just in financial matters, but also in how AI can make you more productive.
For those who watch from a distance, observe Congress, consider voting, sometimes do, sometimes don't. Is there any reassurance you can give people as a member of Congress? Is there anything more positive that happens when the cameras are off as opposed to what we see on the evening news?
Yeah, the good news is that the people, particularly in the Senate, I don't know about the House. I mean, it's like we're worlds apart. We have very little interaction between the House of Representatives and the United States Senate. One, there are so many of them, it's like I don't know how they even know each other's names, all right? So, but there are only 100 of us in the Senate, and we know each other, and we get along pretty well. My friend, Kim Gardner, whose name is on the outside of this building, he and his family came to visit Washington, and I put them up in the Senate gallery to just watch us voting at some point. And after the week that he spent in Washington and his family spent in Washington was over, I said, hey, what was the most impressive thing? He said, we watched Cory Booker and who was it? Ted Cruz, about having a conversation, laughing and yucking it up. It's like, we couldn't believe that. And it's like, yeah, we all get along. So the best thing I can tell you is that there is collegiality amongst our group and among the senators, because we recognize you have to have someone from the Republican Party and Democrat Party come together for something to become law. Those ones of us who want to create law are looking for someone across the aisle to do a deal with. And so I have a bill, for instance, called the Trust Act, and over there, wave over here. The brains of my outfit is over there. Chris Barkley put together something called the Trust Act, which is a process which allows us to finally come to a balance in the cost and the revenue of entitlements. And so I'm the lead of that, along with Joe Manchin, senator from West Virginia. So got a Republican and a Democrat. We got Kirsten Sinema, another Democrat. We got other Republicans. So we try and get a number of each in each party. And that's the good news. We get along pretty well.
Thank you. Thank you. I think it's important to...
And by the way, the other thing is I should note is that even though I can't figure out how to use technology, people like Chris do. He understands how to do it. And
it gets done.
And it gets done. Each senator, my guess is each senator has a staff of smart people that are maybe 25 to 30 people for each senator. And senators who are more senior, I'm a freshman senator. Senators that are more senior that have committee chairmanship positions or ranking member positions, they probably have another, 10 staff people. So I've got 25 or 30 people who are helping me, and they're smarter than I am and more focused on their issue area than I am and help guide me.
Thank you. So it's difficult for some to get too deeply engaged in geopolitics and long-term issues and potential outcomes when they're worried about a recession. Give us your informed opinion. Where are we going? Are we heading into a recession? If so, is there anything we can do to soften that? What do you see coming?
Yeah, you probably have heard stories about Yogi Berra with his non sequiturs. One of his great lines was, "I don't like to forecast, particularly if the future's involved." And so I can't forecast what's going to happen to the economy. I made my living for 25 years in the private sector. Most of that time as an investor, buying businesses or starting businesses, trying to make them better. And when I'd buy a business, I'd put up maybe a third of the price in cash, in equity, but I'd borrow 2/3. So that meant I owed the bank 2/3 and I had to pay interest to the bank. And if a recession came along, why, how am I going to make enough money to pay the interest? And if I can't, the bank will take over my business. I'll lose all my investment. So we're always worried about recessions. But you know what we did? We said, we're not going to stop what we're doing. We're going to plow ahead, because recessions come and then they go. The good news about recessions is they're only around for a year or two and then they're gone. And a good recession is an opportunity as an investor to make an investment or to buy a house or to go for a new job. It's an opportunity. You take advantage of it, and you make sure that you live your life in such a way that if there is a recession, it's not going to cause you to go bankrupt. You don't borrow so much money that if things turn around, that you're going to be lost. So in my investment life, we didn't borrow too much money. We tried to manage it in such a way that even in the worst circumstances, we'd survive. And so I don't spend a lot of time worried about whether there's a recession coming. If there is, we'll be fine. The rest of the world will have a recession as well. We'll all come out of it, and life will go on.
Thank you. There's an interesting workforce trend that plays in many ways into some of the things we've been talking about. There's a reduction, particularly in the United States and particularly among young men who are stepping out of the workforce. They're simply not engaging in the workforce. Are you aware of any of the impact of that trend, and how does that strike you as someone who has created so many jobs? What do you think is happening in the psychology of the young worker who chooses not to engage? Is it fear? Is it lack of confidence? Are people looking at the United States as a failed experiment? Why would that be happening?
One, because people make silly mistakes. Why do I say that? We get confused as to what it is that'll make us happy, and we listen to other people who tell us what'll make us happy. And the reality is, if you don't have a job, if you don't have some occupation, and by the way, maybe your job is working in a charitable organization, you're not being paid. If you're multimillionaire, you don't need a job. But if you don't have a job to do, if you don't have something to occupy yourself, if you don't have a passion, a purpose in life, you're not going to be happy. If you're just sitting on the beach, it's really boring sitting on the beach after about a week. I mean, I know when I lost my presidential bid, it's like I had nothing to do. I went to the beach, and it's like, this is really boring. I mean, running for president, that's engaging and exciting. If you get the chance to do it for sure. But you'll only be happy if you're really engaged in something and working hard and straining your brain or your muscles and interacting with other people. That's number one. I mean, there's something, I didn't know about this. I'm not a great student of economics and so forth. I only took Economics 101 in college, so that's my excuse. But I didn't realize there's a term called social capital. And they rank all the states for their degree of social capital. I had to ask Chris, what's social capital the other day? Because it said Utah's number one in the country in social capital. And social capital says, are people getting married? Are they having kids? Are they going to school? Are they committing suicide? That's obviously a negative. Are they engaged in the workforce? Are they productive? I mean, output per person. I mean, so they measure all these elements and decide which states are the most high in social capital. We're number one. And yet, as a country, I think it's fair to say we're sort of trending downward. There are more suicides. There are more deaths by overdoses. There are people dropping out. Lying flat is a concern in China they're talking about. The same withdrawal from their economy. And the reality is that'll mean people are not as happy. I mean, the funny thing is, getting married, having kids, having a job, and having a purpose bigger than your own selfish interests makes you happier. It's just there's a guy named David Brooks. He's a columnist for the New York Times. Yeah, he wrote a book called The Second Mountain. But he also said that as he's gone back and looked at what makes people happy, he wrote a whole book about this. It is people who make commitments to someone or to something. They make a commitment and then they honor it. It's like having things that you're committed to and honoring it. And whether I agree with what you commit to or not isn't the important thing. The important thing for your happiness is the things you believe in, and you commit yourself to them. And doing so will make you happier. And by the way, our society greater.
I agree with you. So I like to end on a positive note in these annual conversations we have. So I'd like to ask you about what causes you to be optimistic, but I'd like to add a little more depth to it. I think it's a unique opportunity to hear from a United States Senator on this topic. I don't fault young people when they look at our form of government and begin to question it, because it's a little messy right now. It's actually designed to be messy, but it feels even more messy right now. And you hear calls for a different form of government. Perhaps in another country they're doing it better. They're happier than we are. They're taking care of each other better than we are. If I could, what makes you optimistic about our country? And could I ask you to make the case for the American way of life?
Yeah, very, very simply, which is that we have extraordinary challenges. We face a juggernaut in the China approach. Authoritarian governments have a huge advantage. They can move quickly, don't need to get people's opinions. If there's an opinion they don't want to hear from, they can kill you or put you in jail for life. That's what's happening in Russia. That's what's happening in China. So it's very fast moving. It has some huge advantages. It also has some huge disadvantages, which is people who are afraid to take risks are therefore less likely to be innovative and creating the enterprises and the opportunities of the future. And freedom is an extraordinarily powerful elixir. Those nations that have freedom just outcompete those that don't. And while we have our challenges, and while Washington has too much noisemakers and too few lawmakers, we do have freedom. And we have in the past been able to take advantage of that extraordinary elixir for our betterment and the betterment of the world. I mean, we had free enterprise when the rest of the world said, no, it's much smarter to have the government tell everybody what to make and how much to make. That sure sounded good, didn't it? To tell everybody what to do? It just didn't work. Freedom, with all its messiness, with all of its unproductive decision making, freedom works better. And in my opinion, freedom will continue to outperform. Will we have points of retrenchment and weakness? No question about it. But in the final analysis, I believe a free people will, one, insist on freedom ultimately, and will outperform anything else in the world.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Senator Romney.
Thank you. We get to ask them any questions, or
Yeah, do we have,
you guys have to go to class, or I mean,
do we have time or audio for questions? Could we have a few?
I'll repeat the question so you don't have to wait for the mic. Go ahead, shoot.
Sorry, so my name is Recession Baker. My roommate's name is James Van Lloyd. He had a few questions.
You get one.
So one of them is, what role, if any, should the federal government play in AI regulation?
What role should the government play in AI regulation? As much as we think we can play to provide safeguards against the technology from hurting us, and we're all struggling, as I mentioned, to figure out just what that might be. And there are some things, for instance, we can say, okay, one of the big risks is disinformation. All right, deep fakes going out, particularly before the 24 election, of candidates saying things that they obviously didn't say. And so we're looking to say, hey, look, if you put up a deep fake, it's got to be labeled as being AI generated. Got to put that on there. Well, we can say that, but by the way, China doesn't respond to our regulations, and Russia doesn't respond to our regulations. So we can do that for American companies, and hopefully they'll have some impact. But so we can regulate it somewhat. But again, it's on the internet. It's open sourced, so it's for everybody. We have a hard time regulating the world. Hard enough regulating ourselves. So I mean, that's what we're going to have to do. Is I think application by application decide. When I say an application, for instance, deep fakes, or how about military? Our military is really working on what things they can do to make sure that any weapons in the future can only be fired against a human with a human intervention, as opposed to, so no machine can make a decision to kill a human being. All right, and we want to have that agreement reached with other countries in the world. So that requires sitting down and negotiating that with every country in the world, which is you can build these things to do whatever you want with your drones and whatever, but the final kill decision has to be made by a human being. And that's probably something we have to do on a global basis. So others we can do domestically. One is, how do we protect our banks? I mean, what's going to keep AI from going into your bank account and taking all your money? And that's going to require an investment in this country, billions of dollars to develop AI systems to protect against AI. And can we stay ahead? I don't know if we can stay ahead, but it's application by application strategy. Yes, sir.
How would the U.S. move away from the political dialogue, as you said, with individuals who make more noise on Capitol Hill instead of doing more work, maybe?
Yeah. How do we get from the ugliness? How do we get away from the ugliness in this country? I don't know the answer to that. We have become less kind, less listening, less prone to hear people across the aisle express their point of view, less willing to empathize with others that are different. We don't get the same news. We don't get the same facts. Some people watch one cable source or online source, others look at another. We don't even have the same facts. How are we going to make this work? I don't know the answer. I can tell you that in the history of our country and in the history of other nations in peril, one of two things has brought people to their senses. One is either a crisis so severe it woke people up, but not so severe that it killed the country. Or number two, an extraordinary leader, a person of such magnitude, personal honor and integrity, that he or she was able to bring the world together and their world together. Golda Meir in Israel, in our country, Abraham Lincoln. I mean, after the Civil War, to say in his inaugural address, with malice toward none and charity for all. It's like, are you kidding? They just killed my niece, my brother, whatever, with malice toward none and charity toward all. I mean, the extraordinary leader, Winston Churchill. That's, in my opinion, where we have to go. Do I see that on the horizon today? No. All right. I don't see someone who is so powerful and so beloved that the nation comes to that person and they're able to have that influence. That'd be nice. Yes, sir.
You mentioned semiconductors a lot.
Yeah.
You mentioned semiconductors a lot, and it's become a really important issue. And I know that President Biden just passed the CHIPS Act, where he's trying to bring fabs over back to American soil as opposed to overseas in Taiwan and Singapore and all these other countries. What's your opinion on that the administration and America's in general ability to bring semiconductor manufacturing back to American soil, even though considering it's a lot cheaper over there?
Yeah. I think it's the right decision. I voted for the CHIPS Act. It was one of those instrumental in making sure it passed. I can't tell you with 100% confidence it'll be successful. I know that it'll take at least $100 billion to invest in making chips here, and even then we may not be competitive. China has invested at least that much, and they can't make them yet. Taiwan leads the world. We at least are going to have TSMC, the Taiwanese company, managing and building the facilities here. So we got a good shot that we'll be able to learn from them, and we'll be able to produce here. And people say, well, this is industrial policy. It's like, yeah, but it's also national security policy. You need chips, all right, for airplanes, for fighters, for weapons. And we can't rely on a place 100 miles from China to make all of our chips. So we're going to try and make chips here, and hopefully we'll be successful, but it'll take us 6, 8, 10 years. And until then, we sure hope that TSMC is able to do fine in Taiwan. Yeah, thank you. Yes, way back there. I'm trying to get students by and large, so I apologize for the older folks I'm not calling out.
So recently, Utah voted for the Better Boundaries Initiative in order to kind of curb gerrymandering in the state. Our state legislature kind of overruled that in our current congressional map, where they kind of split the Salt Lake Valley between 4 different congressional districts far away. I was wondering what your opinion was on that.
Yeah, one, I make it a habit not to criticize our state legislature, all right? Because I'm at the federal level. I don't want them returning fire. Number 2, I haven't found a good way to avoid gerrymandering. The division of congressional districts is a political process. And the Democrats gerrymander and the Republicans gerrymander. I don't know what the right division of Utah would be for congressional districts. I used to say, well, it should be done by geography, all right? So we should have, Salt Lake City just be one district, and then northern Utah be another district, and southern Utah another district, and then it was pointed out to me, yeah, but we want to have each of our Congress people have a slice of rural Utah, so we have more rural Utah influence in Washington on the various committees. It's like, oh, hadn't thought about that. And that makes some sense. At the same time, they say we'd like to have each of our Congress people have a slice of if you will, urban Salt Lake, so they understand the problems of the cities and care about those things. It's like, oh, yeah, that makes sense too. So I have not found a good answer to it. I think one thing is clear that the court has pointed out, the Supreme Court, which is if the districts have been divided in such a way that they discriminate based on race, and there may be other dimensions they could discriminate as well, but that's not going to stand. The court's going to say, no, you can't do that. But saying we're going to divide them, Republican, Democrat, rural, urban, how you get around that, I just don't know. Yeah, sorry. Yes, sir.
One more.
Oh, one more. Okay, I got one here. Yes, sir. Oh, I haven't called any women. Okay, I'll call. Sorry, I apologize. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Emma Ergang, and I'm not a Utah voter, but I am curious still of what role, if any, do you feel that your religious beliefs have made in talking about the social capitals that you were mentioning about like how those certain practices lead to social capital. Do you think that there's any connection in Utah to the religion?
Yeah, first of all, I'd sure like you to become a voter in Utah, if you will, please.
I'm not living here long term. I'm out.
I do believe that one of the elements of social capital has been our association with groupings that are not just based on work or politics. So whether it's religion or unions or Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, charitable organizations, and we're just doing less and less of that. As you've probably seen in the polls from Pew Research, the number of people who go to a church, any church, has continued to go down. And I think that relates to the reduction in social capital globally. Just because if you go to church and your church has boundaries that include different communities, different ethnicities, different socioeconomic groups, you exchange communication with people who are different than yourself. And you begin to understand other people and their concerns. It gives you more empathy. So a reduction in religious attendance, I think, probably correlates with a reduction in social capital. I just think that, virtually every religion I can think of encourages people to be more kind, more forgiving, more empathetic, more peace-loving. Those are certainly part of my character by virtue of my faith, and I think true of other people in their faiths. I lived, as you probably know, for 40 years in Massachusetts. The state there was over 50% Catholic, and the Catholic Church had an enormous impact, I think, on the social capital of the state. Massachusetts ranks number one in education by far in the country. The NAEP exams that look at K through 12, Massachusetts is off the charts. And I think a lot of that has to do with Catholic schools. The Catholic Church put in place Catholic schools. And so for the for the public schools to compete with the Catholic schools, they had to up their game. And as a result, we just had better education. And there are other things as well that were done legislatively. But I think churches generally have a real impact on social capital. That doesn't mean that people who are not part of churches don't have good values. They do. But for those of us that need a little kick in the pants, I think it may help from time to time. Look, I know we face some real challenges, and I know the future is far more cloudy than the past, of course, by definition. The past has been written. I would give anything to be in your position. I would love to be young again. I would love to have my life ahead of me. I'd love to wonder who I'm going to marry and what kids I'm going to have. I mean, all these things are exciting and fun. Life is fantastic. Living is just, it's wonderful. Every day I look outside and think, isn't this great to be alive and to enjoy all this, despite all the challenges we face? And living here, living in the best country in the world, in my opinion, living in the best state in the country with the best social capital. Look at the mountains. I lived in Massachusetts. Massachusetts is a beautiful state, but there are no mountains like that. This is a fantastic place to live. We, after Ann and I moved out west, we'd been about 30 days away from Massachusetts. She said, remind me again why we lived in Massachusetts for the last 40 years. All right, look at the beauty here. It's wonderful. So enjoy your life, and even though there will be there'll be heartaches and sorrow in your life and disappointment and reversals, it's all thrilling and exciting. And you are fighting for a great cause, which is the preservation of this great nation. Thanks, guys. Good to be with you. Thank you.